This is Max Grossman with the El Paso Taxpayer Revolt, and today we are honored to have James Montoya, who is a candidate registered as a Democrat for District Attorney of El Paso County. And we're honored to have you, James.
Thanks for having me, Max.
I can call you James, right?
Yes, please.
I'm Max.
Yes.
All right. So I'd like to begin by talking a little bit about your life and your career. Are you from El Paso?
Born and raised.
Okay. What part of town?
So East Side my whole life. Very recently moved to Central, but product of Socorro ISD public schools. Graduated from America's High School. You know, back then it was the end of the desert growing up.
Right.
And graduated from America's. Went to George Washington University in D.C. For both undergrad and law school. There was at the time they had a combined undergrad, a BA JD program. I was able to get into that, saved myself a year of school, and came right back to El Paso.
That's a pretty fancy private university.
It cost a pretty penny. The loans were quite substantial.
Okay.
So,
When did you graduate with your JD?
2013.
Okay, so you've been practicing for 11 years?
Yes.
Excellent. Take us through your career.
Yeah, so didn't grow up with any lawyers in my family, didn't know any family friends that were lawyers. In high school, I did a mock trial. It's debate, but you're specifically doing a fake legal case. I really enjoyed it, loved it, thought, I'm really good at this, and it's fun, and it's stimulating. And so that's what motivated me to pursue that BA JD program. When I knew I was going to be a prosecutor at the DA's office. I had interned in law school and in undergrad at the El Paso County DA's office under Jaime Esparza. Got to work on different issues there as an intern. Got to see many, many different trials. And through that process, I knew that's where I wanted to work. And so as soon as I graduated, came back to Texas, took the bar, and started at the DA's office. I was in our misdemeanor section handling, family violence, DWIs for about 6 months, and there was an opening in our homicide section, what was then called the Special Crimes Unit, and applied for that, got into that, and from 2014 to 2020, I was basically working on every homicide, every murder, drunk driving death, happening here in El Paso, like I said, from 2014 to 2020.
All of that?
Yeah, collectively as a team.
Anytime there was a murder in El Paso, you're on the team?
Yes. At the time, there was 4 of us that were handling the cases, and we would work them up as a team. Some of us would hold on to them and see the cases all the way through. Other cases we would give to other lawyers to handle, to take across the finish line. But for the most part, if there was a murder that happened and questions were happening, we were the ones that screened the case. That means we reviewed it initially. We helped law enforcement. If they had any questions at the beginning of investigation, we reviewed search warrants. We, advised them on certain legality issues and worked the case up. We indicted it. And then once the case was indicted in court, we decided either we were going to keep it and see it through to the end, or we were going to reassign it to someone else in the office.
Right. And what aspects of these murder trials did you handle? Jury selection?
All of it, yeah, start to finish.
Did you take the floor and litigate?
Yes. All aspects of a first chair trial, jury selection, questioning of the witnesses, opening, closing arguments, all of it. And so in that time period, that 6 years, I tried close to over 65 cases. Half of them were for murders or capital murders.
Wow.
And so it's very many. My personal goal while I was at the DA's office was 10 trials a year. That was always my goal. Some years I made it, some years not so much. But, and I'll tell you the reason why that's so important, and I think both my opponent, Mr. Hicks, everyone will tell you, I think the DA needs to be a trial lawyer because you're leading an office of trial lawyers. That's right. That's the job. And, many cases are not resolved by trial. Most of them are not. 95% of the cases are resolved either by plea agreement or dismissal.
Right.
And, when we are making plea offers, those are reflecting what results we anticipate we're going to get at trial. And so, for instance, if on a DWI case, a very basic DWI, here in El Paso, if you go to trial on your first DWI, you're going to get probation. The judge or the jury is going to give you 12 to 15 months probation.
Unless you injure or kill someone.
Right. Very basic. We're assuming no injuries. And so if I'm a prosecutor and I'm handling a DWI case, well, if I offer somebody a plea deal of 12 months probation or 15 months probation, well, they might not really take that, because that's exactly what they're going to get if they go to trial.
Right.
And so the whole point of plea bargaining is you got to incentivize somebody to accept responsibility sooner instead of setting every single case for trial. And so to get this back to the point, which is you really can't make intelligent plea offers or intelligent plea bargaining unless you have a sense for how a trial is going to go. Because if you're a defense lawyer and a prosecutor offers you a totally unreasonable plea offer, your recourse is always set it for trial. Let's have a jury decide this punishment. And so if you as a DA are constantly offering unreasonable plea bargains, well, you're going to start having a lot of trials line up. And so that's, I know we got a little ahead of ourselves, but, to me, my trial experience as a lawyer is something I'm very proud of. And I think that's really what separates me from the opponents that I've had in the past and the opponents that I have right now.
Right. Let me take a step back before going through the rest of your career.
Yeah.
Why public service? As an attorney coming out of a very fancy private university like Georgetown, you're eminently...
George Washington.
George Washington.
That's all right.
Excuse me.
Okay.
George Washington. You're eminently hireable. You can go into private practice, possibly make a lot more money.
Yes.
Why public service and why homicide? That's God's work.
Yeah, right? No, exactly. So I will tell you that the internships that I had at the DA's office as a student were very formative for me. Seeing justice be done day to day or not being done was a very powerful motivating factor for me. I can tell you I have a very distinct memory of a trial that I watched. And it was a young lady who had been disciplined by her stepmother very harshly with a belt. And her father was a fireman, and her stepmother was a nurse who her father had married. And of course, as a fireman, he's working 24 hours on, 24 hours off. And so this young lady, she was 14 at the time. She had been struck very severely by her stepmother behind her legs. That was the extent of the case. And then at school, she couldn't sit down. And so the teachers noticed and asked her what's the matter. They showed her the injuries. The school police came. They took a report, and a case was filed for injury to a child. And the stepmother's defense was I was disciplining her. And under the laws of the state of Texas, that is a defense to assault, parental discipline. And that was the entire trial issue, and whether it was a reasonable use of force. And I was assigned to a prosecutor at the time. They had offered the defendant's nurse deferred probation, meaning if she completed it, it would be dismissed. And she declined that, and the case went to trial. And I was there watching and helping the lawyer with small tasks. I certainly, as a student, was not doing any of the questioning or anything like that. But this young lady comes to court to testify, and her father, as you might imagine, took his wife's side and was very disappointed. I don't know about angry, but very disappointed in his daughter. And so this young lady is having to come to court basically by herself. No other support network. No one else there for her. And she's having to come and tell a jury about these things that her stepmother did to her.
Wait, was she a willing witness? Was the state forcing her to testify?
No, she was willing to testify.
Okay.
I mean, she was willing to come to court, and she wanted her stepmother held accountable.
Wow. Okay.
And and you know, this is why we have jury trials. And this poor young lady, like I said, had no one else there for her, no other support system. And I felt for her. I mean, I was a student in college at the time. And so just seeing someone like this, a victim of a crime, you know, have to endure this process alone, was very moving to me. And the jury ended up finding her stepmother guilty, and she did get probation. And they continued living their lives. But, you know, seeing that case, seeing other cases, you know, the only voice, the only advocate for this young lady was the prosecutor, was the assistant district attorney working on that case.
Right.
And seeing her, the prosecutor, you know, do her job and fight for justice for this young lady, you know, it made me think that's what I want to do. I want to be the one standing up for victims and being their voice in the courtroom, because in our system of criminal justice, the DA is the voice for the people.
Right.
And so...
And the DA in that particular case could have opted to dismiss.
Right.
Could have opted to offer a plea bargain that was so attractive that
Right.
she could not turn it down.
Right.
But instead said, here's the offer, take it or leave it.
Right.
And said, yeah, we're going to trial.
Right. That's exactly right.
Okay.
And so, you know, working there and you know, being able to make a difference, you know, once I got to the DA's office, that was only further confirmed for me, you know, and especially working on homicides. I mean, those are the most serious cases that there is. And when someone has had their loved one taken suddenly and violently from them, and you, the assistant district attorney, you are the person getting justice for this person who has been killed, and for this family, there is no, in my opinion, no higher calling. Yeah, I loved it. I loved the responsibility, because you were the one making things happen.
Now, you were already in homicide a year out of law school?
Yes.
Is that unusual?
Yes, it is. I think part of the reason I had done many years of trial advocacy. I had known, you know, the elected DA, Jaime Esparza, you know, in college while I was interning. I had worked with some of the homicide prosecutors as an intern. I had seen several homicide trials by that point. And so I know at that point when there was an opening, you know, Mr. Esparza had wanted to shake stuff up a little bit. And there were some other moves happening around the office at the time. And I was very fortunate that they gave me that opportunity. I had some great mentors. You know, I certainly was not doing anything, you know, unsupervised. In fact, probably that first year I was in the homicide unit, you know, my supervisors were watching me like a hawk. But, you know, at some point, you know, you start off as what's called the second chair. You know, you help the lead lawyer prepare the case, you help the lead lawyer question the witnesses. But over time, rather quickly, you know, I started first chairing my own trials, and at that point, then I started bringing in other lawyers to mentor them, to show them how to handle, you know, a murder case. And so, yeah, it did happen quickly. There was some consternation when it first happened, but I feel really confident that once I showed my advocacy skills and once we got the results, you know, they kind of spoke for themselves.
Okay. Let me take a short break. The wind is banging around something back there.
Sure.
That's what happens in El Paso.
Yeah.
I'm just going to shut this door here.
Sounds good.
A moment. Okay. Thanks for that.
No, of course.
So, James, that takes us through 2020.
Right.
And you ran for office previously.
I did. And so, 2016, Jaime Esparza ran his last campaign, and he had started making it known that was his last campaign shortly after. And so, 2017, 2018, I started giving very serious thought to, you know, I think I can do this. I'd like to do this. I was very proud of the work that we were doing as an office, and so started thinking about it at that point, and had some very some very serious cases happen in 2018, 2019. There was a Thanksgiving home invasion in November of 2018. There was a man who drove from New Mexico, from Albuquerque. He came to Las Cruces. He broke into and assaulted an elderly man on Thanksgiving, drove here to El Paso with a kidnapped victim, and then broke into a house here and killed two members of the family in the northeast of El Paso. And so that one happened, and that was going to be a death penalty case. We had not had a death penalty case here in El Paso for several years at that time. And that was in November of 2018. March of 2019, Deputy Peter Herrera was killed in a traffic stop. And so then we had a second death penalty case pending. And then several months after March of 2019, August 2019, the Walmart massacre happened, a third death penalty case. And, in my opinion, with what was going on, the stakes of having continuity and stability at the DA's office could not have been higher. And so, I was running on that platform. And Ms. Rosales, who had run for DA in 2016, she had ran a second time, and I thought we just had very competing views about what we thought the DA's office should do or should be, or it was very unclear to me what she exactly thought was wrong with the DA's office. I mean, I will tell you, I think the criticism from some members of the criminal defense bar was that we were too harsh on too stringent on certain types of crimes, including domestic violence. I know they felt that there was certain preferential treatment for certain defense lawyers over others. And so, even though I wasn't the incumbent, I was the one running for DA from the DA's office. And so, I was having to eat a lot of the criticism of Mr. Esparza was being attributed to my campaign, and I understand that, and I think that's kind of what the angle was, or at least that was the dynamic of the race.
Right, and Jaime Esparza, I don't know if he wanted to be, but he was kind of controversial for a lot of people, and maybe that was deserved, or maybe it wasn't, but there was a perception among quite a few that he was in the hands of certain politicians, that some of his decisions might be influenced by his connections or donors. And I have no opinion about whether or not that was true, but that was the perception. And there's even been some alarm that he was appointed to be the federal attorney for the Western District of Texas. There are only 4 federal attorneys in Texas, right?
Correct.
He's based in San Antonio, but represents the Western District, so now he's in a position of real power. That's an important post. And you were naturally associated with him because you were close to him, mentored by him.
Right.
And many thought of you as his anointed one.
Sure.
Right.
That's what I heard. Yes.
Rosales was the underdog and the populist. He's going to go in there and change everything. And I'm not afraid of saying that didn't go so well. Okay, it just didn't. Some of you are not going to like me for saying that, but I think it's pretty obvious. Yes. In any case, before we get into that though, you ran in 2020.
Right.
Lost to Rosales.
Yes.
Rosales ended up resigning.
Right.
By force, really.
Right.
And what are you doing after 2020, after Homicide?
Yeah, so COVID happened, in that latter, starting in March of 2020, the runoff happened in July. And actually for several months, I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do next. I knew I was not going to work for Ms. Rosales. It had been very clear on the campaign trail that we just did not see eye to eye. And, that was kind of borne out by her later personnel decision to terminate essentially anyone that supported me in the DA's office. But really that fall, I was looking for different jobs. I certainly did not I did not want to be in a position of having to compete against my former colleagues and my former supporters for the jobs that were here in El Paso. I mean, there was an exodus from the DA's office. People were all applying for the same positions here in El Paso, at the county attorney's office, at the city attorney's office, and people were having to compete and interview against each other, for these positions once they'd been terminated. And fortunately for me, or what a blessing in disguise, there was a Supreme Court decision in July of 2020, and it happened the same week as the runoff election. There was a case called Murt the Oklahoma, and it essentially, as I'm sure you know, Oklahoma, before its statehood, it was the Oklahoma Territory and the Indian Territory. And the federal government had criminal jurisdiction over the Indian Territory. There was 5 main tribes in the Indian Territory that were there. The 5 tribes in Oklahoma, the 5 main tribes, they're not from Oklahoma. They're from the southeast United States. It's the Seminole, the Cherokee, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw. All the tribes that were forcibly removed there to Oklahoma during the Trail of Tears.
Right.
And the federal government had signed treaties with them in the 1820s and 1830s saying this land will be yours forever. Of course, that did not last very long. 50 years later, Oklahoma became a state, and everyone in the state of Oklahoma just assumed that the reservations disappeared, dissolved. And in 2017, a man who was convicted of child sex assault in Oklahoma state courts challenged his conviction, saying, "I am Native American. The land I committed my crime on is native land, was an Indian reservation.
And you don't have jurisdiction."
The state of Oklahoma has no jurisdiction over it. And that issue went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in a 5-4 decision, they said, "You're right. The treaties have never been repudiated, as Congress has never rescinded them. They're still in effect despite Oklahoma's statehood, and the land that you committed your crime on is still the reservation." And so overnight, half of Oklahoma is now on an Indian reservation.
That must be very painful for certain people.
It is. Well, and, the city.
And wonderful for others.
Yes, that's exactly right. It's a very controversial issue in the state, as you can imagine. The city of Tulsa. It's a county, it's virtually the same size as El Paso, a county of close to 1 million people. That is now, the entire city of Tulsa is on an Indian reservation now. And so...
Does that call into question private land ownership?
It does.
Oh,
so
boy.
there are some, they are still fully litigating what this criminal case means for other regulatory issues, in other civil litigation. It has some very widespread consequences.
How many past judgments are going to be revisited?
So it's thousands. And so what happened was overnight, after this Supreme Court decision, thousands of inmates in the Oklahoma State Prison, convicted of very serious violent offenses, started filing writs to have their convictions undone for the same reason. And so the Justice Department put out a call nationwide saying, we need violent crime prosecutors here in Oklahoma right now. And I saw this job posting, and the job posting says, we need violent crime prosecutors for 1 year. We need some serious help. And I saw the posting, I thought, that's right up my alley. I'm a violent crime prosecutor, 2020. This is in the fall of 2020.
So you went to Oklahoma?
I did. And so went and interviewed. I had never been to Oklahoma, and I thought I need to see what it's like, to see if I can, be here.
As a Texan, you're hostile.
Right. No, it's just in your gut. And so went there. Had a fantastic interview at the U.S. Attorney's Office in Muskogee, and they tell us we can only guarantee this position for 1 year. You understand? I said that's all I'm looking for. That is perfect. I'm happy to be here and help you all out. And went to Oklahoma, was in Muskogee, and see it's a tiny town. It's smaller than Las Cruces. It's maybe 20,000 people, but 100 years ago, Muskogee was the capital of the Indian Territory. And so there's a beautiful federal courthouse there, bigger than the one here. That 1930s federal courthouse, the old one downtown, it's twice as big as that. And they had one federal judge and 2 federal magistrates. And the U.S. Attorney's Office, before this decision happened, they had 8 lawyers. It was the second smallest U.S. Attorney's Office in the entire country.
So it ballooned to how many attorneys?
45, 50.
Okay.
They went from filing 90 cases a year to over 500.
Wow.
And so it was a very tumultuous time where someone was getting ready to be released from the Oklahoma State Penitentiary, and we would have to send the FBI over there to go pick them up at the gates, bring them to federal court, and arraign them and start the federal process for the exact same crime. And we ended up having tons of trials. I ended up going to Oklahoma. I had 6 trials in a year, 3 more murder trials, a child sex assault, an aggravated assault. And some of these were old. Some of these were old convictions from, the 2000s. Some of them were new because, the cases that were pending, those were dismissed. And so had to work a lot with state authorities, with the tribal authorities. They were having to fly in FBI agents, for the same reason they were needing prosecutors, they were needing FBI agents from across the country, they were needing defense lawyers. So I, as an assistant U.S. attorney, was working with federal public defenders from Hawaii that were zooming in.
But this is all federal. This was different from your resume.
Right.
That's why, as a Texan, licensed in Texas, you could work there.
Well, so under federal rules, if you're an employee for the Department of Justice, you just have to be licensed in any state, and then you can appear in any federal court.
Right. Okay.
And
that makes sense. So you did that for 1 year, and after 2021, what did you do? So
I was there about 18 months, about a year and a half.
But they told you 1 year.
Right.
It came 18 months.
So they asked, some of these positions are being made permanent. Can we interest you in one? I said, no, thank you. I would like to get back home. I really appreciate the time here. I hope you all are they were grateful for the work I had given them. And, but that was about how long I needed to come back home, and started looking for openings here. And I was following the news of what was happening at the DA's office. I actually filed some public information requests in Oklahoma, and members of Ms. Rosales' staff, they filed Hatch-Ax complaints against me, saying that I was politicking as a federal employee in Oklahoma for filing open records requests. And I knew things were still very troubling over here. There was an opening in the public defender's office, the El Paso County Public Defender's Office. I applied, had an interview. It was expressed to me that several people from the public defender's office did not want me hired because they knew me to be a prosecutor. And but very grateful for Ms. Kelly Childress. She's the head public defender. They were willing to give me a chance. And the last time I ran, some of the critique of me, and I think it's fair, it is factual, was that I had only been a prosecutor.
But isn't that an excellent foundation for going to the other side and defending clients, because you know how prosecutors think?
Right.
Or is it that they thought you were just going to be naturally mean?
I'm not sure. You'd have to ask them, I think. But, the last time I ran, I was criticized that all I had ever known was the DA's office. And I thought, well, here I am trying to get this experience as a defense lawyer, as a public defender, no less. And so I was very grateful for the opportunity. I became a public defender in October of 2022. And so I've been doing that ever since. So for another 18 months about.
Now tell me something. When you went to Oklahoma in 2020, were you let go of?
No.
Rosales, or did you resign?
No. So what happened was, in the fall of 2020, Ms. Rosales asked every single employee at the DA's office, the lawyers, the staff,
To
the
reapply for their jobs.
everyone to reapply. All 180, 90 people in the DA's office. And when she made that decision, or when she asked people to do that, like I mentioned, I knew I was not going to work for her, and so I chose to, I did not reapply. And several other, people decided that they were going to retire, under Mr. Esparza, and so I just chose not to reapply. I served out until the end of that term, which was December 31st of 2020, and then I started in Oklahoma January of 2021.
Right. Okay. Got it. So I want to talk a little bit about Rosales and the current DA,
Sure.
Mr. Bill Hicks. So El Paso County was established in 1850 in San Elizario, only 2 years after the Mexican-American War. And at the very beginning, the core function of the county was a judge, sheriff, a couple deputies, and just some very, very, very basic infrastructure.
Right.
And the total population was under 1,000 people in the whole region. And then in 1883, the county moves to South El Paso Street. The building is still there. It was there from 83 to 86, 1883 to 1886. It's in the old Holland's department store building, that big pink brick building.
I didn't know that.
It's a fact.
Fascinating.
And then from there, it moved to its current location, which had the most beautiful courthouse in 1886.
It was.
Demolished a long time ago. But in any case, the judiciary and the district attorney, these are core functions of the county that are extremely essential, that go right back to the origins of the county, of every county in Texas. So it's just imperative that it functions properly, because without that you have chaos.
Right.
If you're not prosecuting criminals, there will be an immediate and tangible breakdown in law and order. So during the time of Rosales, we all read in the papers with a lot of alarm that cases were being dismissed because of the expiration of the statute of limitations.
Right.
Dangerous people were being let back into the public and committing more crimes. There was a general breakdown in these functions, probably for the first time since the county was established.
Right.
And you're in the middle of all of that. Was it that bad? Your insight,
yes.
right? Is it as bad as we read in the papers?
It's worse than you read in the papers. Okay, there was, I have heard from colleagues that were in the DA's office that they were afraid to say hello to former colleagues in public because they thought they would be reprimanded or retaliated against in the DA's office. I mean, people were scared. They were scared for their livelihood. They were scared for their job safety. It is worse than the public knows how bad it got.
And dozens of people lost their jobs, and many of them were seasoned attorneys who were qualified in your estimation, right?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of these lawyers, anytime there's a new DA or anytime there's a new elected official, you expect turnover at the top. You just do. I mean, and honestly, the elected official is entitled to that. You're entitled to a leadership or a management team that fits with your vision, whatever organization. That is understood.
But this was a top to bottom purge.
Yes. You had people in non-policy making positions losing their jobs. And like I said, what was most troubling, all of it was troubling, but it wasn't just lawyers. It was victim services personnel. It was secretaries. It was investigators. It was receptionists. It was people with decades of institutional knowledge that, if you had told them, if Ms. Rosales had told them, look, y'all, new sheriff in town, this is the way we're handling these cases from now on, they would have done it. If she had directed, hey, prosecutors, I know we used to, be very tough on domestic violence. I want us to handle things a little differently. They would have done it. And it just cut really, really deep to the bone. When the Harris County DA in Houston took office, she fired close to 40 people.
Wow.
That's an office of 300 lawyers. Here, we had 90 lawyers. And so it was just, And part of the other troubling aspect is the people that she got rid of were people. There had been people many years, longer than 20 years, who had their whole career under Jaime Esparza. But there was also lawyers who had been there 5 years, 7, 10 years. And those were the people who were doing the job, in the courts every day, working the cases. And those are really the lawyers you need, not just in the DA's office, but at law firms, at legal organizations, at Rio Grande, at wherever the place might be, because those are the folks who are mentoring your new hires. And law school, I will tell you, teaches you nothing to be a lawyer.
So remind me, how many people were employed in the DA's office before Rosales?
So
190?
It's between 180 and 190.
And how many of those were forced to reapply for their jobs?
All of them.
All of them.
All of them.
So that's pretty unusual.
Yes.
Okay. And my understanding is that the number of attorneys dropped to something like 60?
Yes.
Okay. So I interviewed Bill Hicks, one of your opponents.
Yes.
And he's a Republican. After the resignation of District Attorney Rosales, he was appointed by the governor of Texas directly, Greg Abbott.
Yes.
Obvious that it's going to be a Republican. And I had a long and interesting interview with him, and he basically told me much of what you just told me. That a lot of people lost their jobs, that there was a lot of chaos. He also stated that almost anybody who had any association with Jaime Esparza was treated with suspicion, usually not rehired.
Right.
Everything from campaign donations to socializing, right?
Yeah.
So all of that happened, and so he is struggling to restaff, and he tells me he's up into the 70s. He's aiming for 85. There was a major backlog in cases, which has been approximately cut in half, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, so I'll get to that, but keep going.
Right.
Yeah.
So he's facing all these challenges and running around Texas, recruiting attorneys to fill some of these positions. That's how challenging this is.
Right.
Just to bring us up to speed, you're a Democrat. You prevailed in the first round. Nancy Casas was eliminated.
Correct.
Right? And so now you are facing Trejo.
Correct.
Okay. The two of you are vying for the Democratic position. Nomination. And that election is?
May 28th. It's
May 28th.
Tuesday after Memorial Day.
Tuesday after Memorial Day, May 28th. The Democratic nominee will be decided upon.
Yes.
And that person will face the incumbent,
Correct.
Bill Hicks, on November 5th.
Correct, in the general election.
Okay, so currently your position is your opponent is a Democrat, but if you prevail, you'll be facing the incumbent, the Republican.
Correct.
Let me ask you about that first and foremost.
Sure.
I'm not much of a party person. I'm a libertarian. Okay, I vote for Democrats and Republicans. If you look me up, you'll see me voting in both primaries. I vote for the most qualified, talented candidate, the most meritorious candidate. I do a lot of research to make sure, at least in my mind, that is the best person for the job. I always found it troubling that in Texas, Supreme Court justices run along party lines, for example, or that DAs run along party lines. How do you feel about that? Is there any advantage to a DA running as a Democrat or Republican? Does it imply a certain philosophy? Should a Republican vote for a Democratic DA incumbent? I mean, what are your thoughts about party and your position?
Yeah, so I do think, when we could talk about whether judges should be elected. That is a whole separate conversation, whether we should have appointed judges or elected judges. I think it's absolutely critical for your DA to be elected. And the DA is the people's representative in our criminal justice system.
But city reps are elected without party.
Right.
County commissioners and the county judge run on party.
Correct.
And so does the district attorney.
Right.
Is that a good thing?
I think partisan races, in kind of towns like this where you're a one-party kind of city, I think that's just the natural of how they've been. If you, back to statehood, and we're having partisan races for other public policy positions. I don't see a problem having it for your DA.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you're not opposed. In any case, I will say this: there is a good range of choice on the Democratic side.
Right.
3 candidates, all of them impressive in their own ways, right? So the voters do have choices here. Now they have a choice of 2 candidates, of course, on the Democratic ticket. And so let's talk about Mr. Hicks. Is he doing a good job?
I think he's in good faith trying. I think there are things that he could be doing better. I think fundamentally at the end of the day, they're still having the staffing crisis is still ongoing. I know he represented that there are 70 lawyers. I will tell you, I'm not sure.
I think he said 73.
Yeah. In the last 2 weeks, 2 other felony lawyers have given their notice to resign.
Yeah, he told me during the interview that it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back. That you have ongoing resignations for no fault of his, and then you have ongoing hires, and you try and beat the curve. And he said that he was in the mid-70s.
So, when he says these resignations are no fault of his, I disagree. I mean, I'm hearing from people in the courthouse that they are disagreeing with the management policies and just the nature of the office. And so I think there are things that he could be doing to both retain and attract the people that are working there. I
can you be specific as much as you can?
Sure. Well,
what should he be doing better?
Yeah, well, so I'll tell you one of the first things is that I heard, or not even that I heard, this is confirmed. So there are cameras in the courthouse, right, on the entrance floors that is monitored by the sheriff's office to see for security purposes. When Mr. Hicks took office, they installed separate security cameras on the 2nd floor of the DA's office that are only viewable by the supervisors in the DA's office. They're not for security. This is to monitor employees coming and going to see who's there at the office or not. And, I'm not really sure the logic behind that, but I can tell you it's terrible for office morale. The employees feel like they're being surveilled, that they're being watched, that they can't be trusted to work whatever hours they're going to work.
Why would there be that degree of surveillance? What's the reason? There must be a reason.
I don't know. I think they want to see when people are coming and going from the office. I've heard reports that they're going by and making sure that the lawyers are there promptly at 8 and that they leave no sooner than 5. That these and
okay, so
I guess that is one management style, but in my opinion, that is not how you manage a professional. Respectfully, a salaried professional.
What else? You got the cameras?
Yeah, I got the cameras, got the very prompt that. I know there's been a lot of consternation over some of the supervisors that he has selected to be supervising the day-to-day of the office, that there's a tremendous amount of pressure to produce and not enough guidance or support to these younger lawyers as to how they should be handling certain things. And so I think I'll tell you the other big one is the chief of staff. Okay, and so this is a position that Mr. Hicks created in the DA's office. Did not exist under Jaime Esparza. It did not exist under Ms. Rosales.
Yeah, I met him, Renee.
Yes. And so Mr. Diaz, he is not a lawyer. Okay? The way that things used to work under Mr. Esparza, I don't know how they worked under Mr. Rosales, but I will also tell you it's quite similar to the other 2 government offices I've worked in, the U.S. Attorney's Office in Oklahoma and the Public Defender's Office. You have the DA or the U.S. Attorney or the Public Defender. Below them is what's called the First Assistant, okay, who is also a lawyer, and they are basically, if the DA is the CEO, the First Assistant in all these organizations is the COO. And this is the person that really manages the day-to-day of the office. They supervise the lawyers, they supervise the non-lawyer staff. And so Mr. Hicks created this position for Mr. Diaz, who is not a lawyer, has a criminal background. Was indicted in Doñana County for extortion, for some type of fraud involving his time as a contractor for Sunland Park in 2012. And I know that bothers some folks in the office, that the number 2 person in the DA's office, the chief of staff, is someone with a history of fraud and extortion. And from what I have heard is that he also creates this atmosphere of politicization within the office. And this is someone that Mr. Hicks has speaking on his behalf. This is someone who's involved in case management. And you have lawyers reporting to someone who is not a lawyer.
Okay, so you don't like his management style.
Right.
Bit heavy-handed.
Correct.
The surveillance is
right.
something that you question.
Right.
But not his skill as an attorney.
Mr. Hicks certainly no. Yeah. Bill, I've known Bill, and
he's got a real
trial lawyer. He is a trial lawyer.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. What about prosecutorial discretion?
Yeah.
Do you agree with his choices about what laws should be emphasized, what laws should be de-emphasized, what should be prosecuted, what should be dismissed, how pleas are handled? Do you think that he's handling this properly?
No. From what I can gather as a defense lawyer, as a public defender, is there is no guidance being given to the lawyers on what to prioritize and what not to prioritize. Right now, they simply do not have enough lawyers to handle the cases that are happening, the cases that are filing. I want to talk about the backlog. These 14,000 cases that so what happens is the police will investigate a crime, they'll make an arrest. They then present the case to the DA's office for prosecution. So here in El Paso, there's about 25 to 30,000 cases per year that are presented to the DA's office. At that point, the DA's office has a decision. They can accept the case for prosecution and they file the charge and it goes on in court. They can decline the case for prosecution and that's it. It's over. No charges are filed. And then the third one is what we call RFI, return for investigation. You tell the agency, the case isn't complete. Please do some more investigating. When you're done, bring it back. And so what happened under Ms. Rosales is she gutted very severe, the whole office, but one of the areas that was hardest hit was the intake section, which is the portion of the office that handles these cases being presented. And that's where this big backlog started happening, was at the front end of the DA's office. Cases were piling up, they were not moving them. And so if you look from 2018, 2019, 2020, 2021 and 2022, there was a precipitous drop in the number of cases that were being filed in court. And the cases were backing up in the DA's office. Now Mr. Hicks since he's been appointed, and they're working through this backlog, filing charges, now the cases are being moved from inside the DA's office into the court system. So the backlog isn't going away. It's just being moved from one end of the DA's office to the other end of the DA's office.
The way you describe this, it sounds like a plumbing issue.
Yes.
I imagine tubes and pipes.
That's exactly it. And so there are lawyers who screen the cases. The lawyers decide, are we going to accept this case or decline it? Once that decision is made, the case is then passed off to a trial lawyer. And the trial lawyer is the one actually handling it with the defense lawyer, with the judge.
Right.
And so right now, those are the people now being saddled with the backlog.
Okay. So I want to get to your current opponent.
Sure.
We're talking about the winner of the Democratic primary, the runoff election, who will face the incumbent Republican Bill Hicks. Let's talk about Ms. Trejo.
Sure.
Tell us why you're more qualified than her.
So,
and then, by the way, I'm going to give her the opportunity to answer the same question.
Yeah. I'm the one that actually has the experience working on these kinds of very serious cases. But more importantly, and I think this is what separates me from Mr. Hicks, is that I have a team of lawyers who want to go back and work at the DA's office. Colleagues that I've kept in touch with, new folks that I've met who are open and they're willing to go back to the DA's office for the right leader.
You're talking about some of the people who were dismissed by Rosales.
Sure. Some of them.
You want to bring them back on board?
Sure. Some of them, and actually some new folks that I've met at the public defender's office, other lawyers in El Paso County, who want to go back. These are people in private practice. These are people, the county attorney's
and they're in El
office.
Paso.
They're in El Paso.
Now wait a second here. We've got Mr. Hicks going to Austin and other cities looking for young attorneys to come fill these ranks.
Right.
Why are these people not being considered?
Well, one, I don't think they want to work for Mr. Hicks. That's what it is. They don't want to work for Mr. Hicks.
That's a very frank thing that you're telling us.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think one of it is because I think he's a Republican, and I think people still see kind of the instability in the office. And I think the big other factor that's preventing some people who would want to go back now is they don't know who the DA is going to be in 6 months.
Right.
And so there are people who, whatever position they're in right now, whether they're working for a different government law office, whether they're in private practice, nobody wants to give up their position they're in now to go work in a DA's office where you don't know who the DA is going to be in 6 months.
Right.
And because people are traumatized by what happened under Ms. Rosales. There are no civil service protections.
And she's a Democrat.
Right. There are no civil service protections at the DA's office.
Right.
And so
it's an at-will kind of atmosphere.
Absolutely. And so there are folks, like I said, who I think they want to go back now, but they're just worried. They're worried about the environment. They're worried about...
Are we talking about a handful of people or a couple dozen?
I think it's between a dozen and 15 lawyers.
So you could potentially restaff the office quickly, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay. Let me get to now the nitty-gritty here.
Sure.
I want to learn more about your philosophy
Mm-hmm.
And how you would apply that as a district attorney.
Sure.
Because your discretion
Mm-hmm.
is what a lot of people are interested in here, especially our viewers. You have hot-button issues like SB4.
Right.
And the DA will have a lot of say as to how or whether certain laws are going to be enforced.
Mm-hmm.
Can you comment a little bit about, for example, immigration? Let's talk about that. As a DA, what is your philosophy of immigration? How would you use your discretion to apply your philosophy?
Yeah. So, charging someone with a crime is a political act, okay? Because there are resources. We are using state resources. It's the same as voting on bonds or voting on a project.
Wait a second. Trying someone for a crime is a political act?
Yeah, at a fundamental level, because when you're charging someone with a crime, you are bringing the weight of the state of Texas against somebody. And so when you have a crime, the state of Texas versus Max Grossman, I as the DA am bringing the power of the state of Texas against you. Now, who is the state of Texas, right? It's the electorate. And so when I tell, in jury selection, when I'm telling jurors, hey, if I'm the prosecutor, when we bring charges, we are doing it in your all's name. The police are acting on your behalf. We are acting on your behalf. When we're seeking the death penalty against the Walmart shooter, we are doing that on behalf of this community, on behalf of the voters. And so when there's choices that have to be made about...
but each crime corresponds to one or more statutes,
Yes.
federal or state.
Right.
And so, the question is, not necessarily political, right? I mean, you're simply enforcing a statute.
Right. And Max, I'll tell you the secret is we cannot charge every single case that happens. It's just not possible. When I tell you that law enforcement brings to the DA's office 25 to 30,000 cases a year, we do not have the manpower or the courts to fully prosecute every single one of those cases. It's just not possible.
Right.
And so choices have to be made about what types of crimes are going to be prioritized. And so that's part of why you decline a case for prosecutorial discretion, or a case that just doesn't meet the elements, that we can't prove it. Or maybe we think this person did it, but we can't prove it. We're making a judgment call on the strength of the evidence.
And there's a lot of discretion there.
Right, total, absolute discretion.
So, maybe rather than focusing on immigration, let me ask you it this way. How would you apply your prosecutorial discretion differently from the current DA, Bill Hicks?
Yeah, so right now there is no guidance. And to me, my philosophy, the philosophy that I have and that I'm going to bring to the DA's office and I'm going to ask my assistant prosecutors to apply is, what makes our community safer? Okay. Does filing a charge in this case make us safer? Does seeking prison time make us safer? Is probation an acceptable alternative? It could be. Is restitution in this particular case more important than a conviction? Okay. And I want to instruct people. To me, the cases that matter are the crimes of violence, are the homicides, the sexual assaults, the crimes against children, the shootings, gang violence, domestic violence. Those are the types of cases that I want my staff, my prosecutors focused on repeat DWIs. And I will tell you, so here's just a small anecdote where one of my coworkers had a client who was charged with robbery, and in a separate case, he was also charged with possession of a controlled substance less than 1 gram, or between 1 and 4 grams. Okay. Tiny amount of cocaine. And other misdemeanor crimes. And this person, this particular defendant, was willing to plead guilty to prison time on the robbery. And he was willing to go to prison for that. And a tentative plea deal was met, and what ended up happening is the prosecutor said, well, I also need him to plead guilty to this cocaine charge and these other legal charges. And that ended up causing a dispute. And the plea agreement dissolved over these smaller cases. And when I heard this story, it really struck me as odd, because here you have someone who's willing to go to prison for a robbery, and because this young prosecutor is getting hung up on these non-violent, victimless crimes, the whole plea agreement dissolved. And
this is not an abstract thing. You're talking about this DA's office.
Right.
Okay. You're talking about recent history.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
But I want to press my question. How would you apply your discretion differently from the current DA? What would you do different in terms of your discretion?
Yeah. So the DA can't screen or review every case themselves. So it's not possible. You have to hire and you have to empower your assistants to use their discretion on your behalf.
Under your guidance.
Right.
And your philosophy.
Right. And so my guidance to them, and I even hate saying, we're going to create policies. I prefer guidelines, because there's always an exception to the rule and there's an exception to the exception. And so my guidance to them will always be prioritize the violent crimes. Those are the cases we should be going to trial on. Prioritize the repeat DWIs. Prioritize the types of cases where there is a threat to our community. And I promise you, there are enough cases like that here in El Paso pending right now. And from what I am seeing as a defense lawyer, they're getting distracted. They go to trials on cases that they should be dismissing. They dismiss cases that they should be going to trial on. Here's just another small example.
It sounds like you're describing sort of willy-nilly choices.
Right.
There's no logical...
There isn't. There's no rhyme or reason. And you can get a plea offer from one prosecutor on one type of case and from another prosecutor with a same case, similar defendant, a totally different plea bargain.
You see, I thought that as a Democrat you were going to make an argument something like, well, he's Republican and he's following the line of Greg Abbott and over-prosecuting undocumented people. I thought you were going to say that, but you're telling me something very different. You're basically saying he's under-prosecuting certain cases,
yes,
over-prosecuting others,
yes,
without clear direction.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I would tell you, I know we're running long, but I had a case with a young public defender who came to me and asked for advice on a DWI trial. And he says, I need some help. This case is scheduled for trial. And I review the case, and our client, he's a 60-year-old man, and he was spotted by a security guard in Fabens, driving erratically, and he crashed over a traffic pole, and then he passed out at the wheel. And so the security guard calls the sheriffs, the deputies show up, the man is passed out at the wheel, the car is off, the key is in the ignition, there's a tall boy in the center console. The front end of the car is a mess from the traffic pole. They ask him to step out of the car, and he refuses to do the sobriety test, but he agrees to give a breath sample. And his breath sample is 0.32. He is 4 times over the legal limit.
Yeah, a couple dozen drinks.
Yeah. And I review the case, and I go tell my young colleague, my friend, I don't think we have a defense. There was an independent witness. He blows well over, this isn't even close. And I asked
should have been in a coma.
Right. I said, what's the plea offer? It's 15 months probation. And I tell my colleague, maybe we should consider taking the plea. And he says, no, I have a feeling this assistant prosecutor is gonna chicken out. And the case had already been postponed twice. Once because I guess the officer who did the arrest was not available, and then a second time because they had forgotten to put a witness on the witness list, the lady who maintains the breathalyzer.
And what was the outcome?
On the day before the trial, dismissed. We didn't even ask for it. The prosecutor just sent over a dismissal. When did that happen? Several months ago.
Wow.
And on the reason on the dismissal was the evidence is insufficient. And I didn't get it. To this day, I don't understand. I don't know if there was problems with the case that were not visible or that only they know, but they're supposed to tell us.
Do you blame the DA?
Yes, absolutely.
Because every case of this nature, every case that gets prosecuted goes over the DA's desk.
Well, it tells me that the supervision and the mentorship is not there. It's not happening. And the people that he's brought in, they're not making it happen. I don't expect Mr. Hicks to be down there, telling every single prosecutor how to handle every single case. But whoever the folks that he has entrusted to do this supervision, it's just not happening.
Right. So let me, before we conclude, I know we are running long, ask you about 2 specific areas. Mm-hmm. First, DWIs.
Right.
We're starting to talk about that anyway.
Yeah.
It's a problem in El Paso.
Yes.
I can tell you that as a West Sider, I see people swerving around the neighborhood all the time on a Friday night. Mm-hmm. I've got a newborn and a 6-year-old. And, we try not to go out late at night, of course, and take extra precautions. But you also read about these people getting arrested multiple times for the same offense, getting let off repeatedly, not going to jail, 7, 8, 9 DWIs, and you wonder how these people are still driving a car.
Right.
How would you approach that problem as a DA? You brought it up yourself a couple of times. Yeah. Is it a problem? Should it be more heavily, should it be taken more seriously by the DA?
Absolutely. So I will tell you here, and we need the community to take it more seriously. Because, as I told you at the beginning, the plea offers that the DA's office made, or that they should be making, reflect the value judgment of the community. So here in Texas, your first DWI is a misdemeanor. Your second DWI is a misdemeanor. Your third DWI is a felony. Okay, that's the law. I will tell you here in El Paso, on your first DWI, and this is probably true for the entire state of Texas, your first DWI, everybody's getting probation. You commit DWI, you're going to get probation. Commit your second DWI, you're going to get more probation. Okay. Your third DWI, now we're going to give you 10 years of probation. At that point, clearly that is not working.
Are you sending people to Alcoholics Anonymous? What are you doing?
So on your first DWI, there is a portion where you're having to go to classes, you're having to take, substance abuse classes, you're having to go what's called a victim impact panel, where you go and listen to victims of DWI and how that conduct has affected their life. And so that happens your first time. That also happens your second time. Right now, and the problem is, we're sending people to prison for DWI thirds. That is happening, but sometimes that isn't solving their substance abuse issues. And a lot of it, again, depends on what a jury is willing to do. I personally have seen cases in the El Paso County Courthouse where somebody kills somebody in a drunk driving crash. And because the person has no criminal history, a jury gives that person probation. 10 years probation for killing somebody in a drunk driving crash.
Rather than intoxicated manslaughter.
Well, for intoxicated manslaughter. I have seen juries give probation.
But that's the penalty for intoxicated manslaughter.
Yes.
That's convicted of.
Yes. A jury, if someone has no priors, has no felony convictions, a jury can give somebody probation for intoxication manslaughter.
But as a DA, what could be your role in clearing some of these people off our streets? What can you do as a DA?
So I think people that have DWI thirds, part of it is looking how old is the DWI. Is this somebody who had DWIs back in the 80s or 90s? Is this someone who's having a recent string of DWIs? Is this someone who's actually made efforts to try to turn this around? And I will tell you this, even if somebody has an alcohol problem, they don't have a driving problem, okay? You can have a substance abuse issue. You can have an addiction. You do not have an addiction to driving, okay? And so, one, it's a matter of, DWIs are a problem across the state of Texas. We have terrible public transportation. The rates of DWI are significantly higher here in the state of Texas than certain East Coast states that have a more robust system of public transportation. But that's neither here nor there. But it's a multifaceted approach. I commend Mr. Hicks for partnering with Uber, for trying to supply, some government subsidies to folks, on certain days that they can use to get home safely. I think that's a component of it. I think there's more, back when I was at the DA's office, we had an Out for Blood campaign. A lot of folks don't realize this, that when you refuse to provide a breath sample, the police department will get a warrant for a sample of your blood. That used to be only on certain weekends. It used to be on holiday weekends. And in many other counties in Texas, they only do it on certain days. Here in El Paso, it's 24/7, 365. If you refuse to provide a breath sample, you will have your blood drawn. That was a major step forward that we took under Mr. Esparza. I'm glad we still have it. It's something that is happening. It really makes our ability to prosecute DWIs a lot stronger. And so really, to me, where we ought to be focusing is on these people that have second DWIs, third DWIs, really asking ourselves, what is this person's issue? What are the resources we can get them? If they're not willing to accept help, then they need to go to the penitentiary. Okay, fair enough. So,
the other issue I wanted to ask you about is the smuggling statute,
sure,
which is a recent state law,
mm-hmm.
correct? The governor has been coming down hard on illegal immigration
mm-hmm.
and undocumented people. And some people are strongly in favor of that, others are opposed. And I'm told by some attorney friends of mine in town that the law is fairly vague and could enable the police to arrest somebody simply for transporting somebody in a vehicle, in a
right.
private vehicle,
right.
who is undocumented, whether
right.
or not they know that person is undocumented.
Right.
That person is liable for that, and that's a serious offense now in Texas.
Right.
Is that true?
That, there's an aggressive reading of the law where it is vague in some respect, that if a prosecutor was very aggressive, they could file charges against someone in that situation. I haven't seen it applied like that here. I will tell you,
Now, the district attorney Hicks is saying that's not going to be applied.
Right, right. What I will tell you, what I'm seeing in my office, in the public defender's office, is there are some people who are being prosecuted. So we're seeing a change in tactics where these smuggling networks, they will leave a car on this side of the border, and they'll tell a group of migrants crossing, get in the car and drive. The car's here, you take it. And so the person being charged with human smuggling is in fact one of the migrants who just happens to be the one that got chosen to drive the car. I don't really think that was the intent of the statute. What I would like to see, and this is where we're seeing a lot of these car chases, where DPS, these car chases that happen, they're not an accident, okay? They're not just random traffic stops. What's happening is CBP, Border Patrol, they are seeing crossings on New Mexico, in New Mexico, and in Texas, and they see the cars, but the Border Patrol is not stopping the cars. And they are able to relay that information to Texas DPS and say, this car, this van, has migrants on it. We saw it on drone surveillance. We saw it on surveillance.
So these vehicles will drive right past the feds.
Right.
And into the hands of the state.
Right. And then what ends up happening is DPS then has a pretextual traffic stop. They see a traffic violation and they're trying to pull the car over for this pretextual reason, because they know there are migrants in the car. And this is where we're seeing these high-speed chases happening. They're the only ones that have that kind of pursuit policy. The El Paso Police Department, the Sheriff's Office, nobody else engages in pursuits like that. And people have died as a result. And thus far it's been migrants involved. There was a crash where a trooper got hurt, and frankly, I think it's just a matter of time before either a trooper is more seriously injured or an innocent motorist is injured in one of these chases. What I would like to see, and we see this also with the bridge trafficking, with the drug trafficking, is it's really easy to pick off the lowest guy on the totem pole. All right, you pull the car over, you get the driver, that's the human smuggling case. Well, who's telling him that the car's there? Who's putting him up to it? Is it somebody over there? Is it somebody over here? The same thing, we have these 17-year-olds who are caught with massive amounts of methamphetamine on the bridge. And what we see time and time again as a defense lawyer is they're going to indict this 17-year-old. It's a mandatory minimum 15 years in prison, and there's almost no effort. There's no effort trying to track down the big fish.
Isn't that the job of federal investigators?
That's
outside of your purview.
Right.
That's FBI and Homeland Security.
Well, and so there's a drug task force. There's a joint task force of state and federal investigators working on these types of cases. And so, what I would like to see is more proactive work, on both parts, going after. We imprison one drug mule. There's 10 guys behind them in Mexico willing to do the same thing for $250.
Yeah.
What I would like, and so you ask me, what are we gaining from locking up this 17-year-old for 15 years in prison?
That's the horror, isn't it?
Yeah,
the fact that there are the recruiting ground.
Yes.
For the narcos is vast.
And the reason why 17 is why they pick 17-year-olds, 16, 17-year-olds is the feds don't pick up those cases because it's under federal law, 17-year-olds are minors. And there's a bunch of hoops that the federal government has to jump through to prosecute a 17-year-old.
Yeah, well, they know what they're doing, the bad guys.
And the state of Texas, a 17-year-old is an adult. And so, and you're exactly right. That's why they pick and target, these teenagers. And, sometimes you ask yourself, how is us sending this particular kid off to the penitentiary making us safer? Sometimes I'm not sure that it does.
Right. James, let me ask you one last question. The same question I asked Mr. Hicks. just out of curiosity,
Yeah.
who is or was your favorite Supreme Court justice in your lifetime?
In my lifetime, I'm going to say Elena Kagan. She's a fantastic legal writer. You know, she was the Solicitor General. I think she's a pretty centrist, you know, left-center judge.
She embraces the living, breathing Constitution philosophy.
Yeah, well, pragmatic interpretation. I mean, you know, I understand the appeal of textualism, but the reason why these cases are getting up to the Supreme Court is because there are ambiguities in the document, in the text, that we're having to answer, you know, 200 years later. And really, I think what it comes down to is your opinion on what we would call in the legal field substantive due process. Because your procedural due process, you know, are the rules being followed, or is this person being entitled to a trial before an impartial adjudicator? You know, and then you have this idea of, and it is, you know, it's I can understand people's opposition to this idea of substantive due process, which are that there are rights, not in the Constitution, but that are fundamental to a free society that we're going to enforce, you know. And so, you know, the right to interstate travel, the right, parental rights, right, to educate and take care of your child. You know, those are not rights enumerated in the Constitution, but we have decided that those are fundamental to ordered liberty, and we're going to say that those are substantive due process rights.
Right. Okay, I see. So the Scalias of the world are a little bit too inflexible.
Correct.
In your mind.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, look, this has been a wonderful discussion, and we appreciate it very much. Just for the record, we at the Taxpayer Revolt do not endorse anybody for judicial positions, DA positions. We stay out of that. We much prefer to let the candidates speak and to try our best to ask them the same questions. So we will reach out to Ms. Trejo and offer her the opportunity to sit in the same chair and ask the same questions. But I can tell you I really appreciated this conversation, learned a lot, and thank you for your time, for taking time out to come join us today. Yeah, you know, I know I mentioned it the first time we talked on the phone that I know you and I do not see eye to eye on many public policy issues. You know, many of the people that you, not just people, public servants and policies that you criticize, you know, I don't necessarily agree with, but I appreciate the invite. You know, I'm very committed to being a DA for all El Pasoans. You know, you mentioned the fundamental job of the government is to ensure that we live in a safe community and that we have a working judiciary, not just criminal justice, but on civil side too, because if civil litigants don't feel like they're receiving justice, they can resort to other means. And so to me, it's very important that the community, everyone in the community has confidence in their criminal justice system and in their judiciary. So I appreciate the invite, Max. Okay. All right. James, thank you. Thanks.